guests and a moderator, Lina Ferreira. She's a reporter at TDM channel. Thank you, Lina, for accepting to moderate this session. This is a session made in partnership with the Association of Press in Portuguese and English in Macau. José Carlos Matias is the president of that association, so thank you, José, as well, for making it possible to have here Jodi Schneider today, and also, of course, Isabel Lucas and Jenny Lau Phillips. Round of applause.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot, Elder. This is the outcome of something that we've been working on for quite some time. So we put things together, and I'm really happy that we have this great panel. This takes place also somewhat as part of the International Federation of Journalists Women Lead campaign. Our association is throwing full support to this campaign, building strategies for female leadership in unions. We still have some way to go in that respect for sure, but it's important to raise awareness, to talk about it. Women leadership, empowerment in newsrooms, in the media, in literature. So I'd like to thank you very much to Script Road Festival, Elder, everybody. Lina, thanks for kindly accepting my invitation. It's really kind. Jenny, Isabel, and Jodi, thanks a lot. The floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, José. After the guys introduced us, now it's time for the women. And so there are 3 women on stage here. We're going to talk about women voices. So first I should introduce them. We have Jodi Schneider. She's top news editor at Bloomberg in Hong Kong. She has been also working in Tokyo, also for Bloomberg and Washington, and also working covering Congress. And she also worked for the Washington Post before, right? Yes. And also have Isabel Lucas, who has been here throughout the week. And she's a journalist and a literary critic, right? And she works for Ler, which is a literary magazine in Portugal, and works for Público. She's a daily newspaper in Portugal, and also wrote a book that was actually talked about in a session here before on Tuesday, which is called, I have to read, Journey to the American Dream. And it has to do with American elections. I don't know if you talk about Hillary Clinton in the book or not. I'm starting to read it still. And we have our Macau representative, Jenny Lau Phillips. She's a professor at the University of St. Joseph. She teaches quite different topics, management and economics, right? Startups. Entrepreneurship. And also literature too. So different topics there. And she's also a writer. And she launched a book 2 years ago called The Legend of the Chinese Zodiac. It's a children's novel. And she also known for writing a column for the Macau Daily Times, which is a daily newspaper in English, in Macau, so where she talks about Macau people and Macau traditions, and she goes back to all those traditions in Macau. So actually, this debate was kind of triggered by a project that Jodi Schneider is leading in Bloomberg. The project is called Women Voices, and as far as what I read, the idea is to bring more women to the public sphere, to the news, have journalists quoting more women as experts and officials, etc. Jodi, do you think you can explain what this project is about?
Sure. Thank you. Is this on? Good, great. Thank you for inviting me, and I'm really happy to talk about this and get some conversation going about it. First, I want to talk a little bit about why we're doing this. And I have some US statistics, even though we started our project in Asia, but I'll use the US statistics. Research in the US has shown that men dominate the US media. They produce 62% of all bylined articles and other credits in print, television, and the internet and wire news, according to, that's 2017 data from the Women's Media Center in Washington. Men are the source for most stories, with very few women interviewed. What we decided to do at Bloomberg was to address this head on. I was in Japan, and realizing I was meeting a lot of women who were economists and in finance, and the things that Bloomberg covers. We're basically a business financial news organization, and yet we weren't quoting them in our stories. So I was talking to one of our, the editor who was leading our coverage in Asia about this, and he said, well, go do something. I said, well, what do you mean, go do something? What can I do? He goes, go do something. Go get started. You're meeting these people. Figure out a way to use what we do well at Bloomberg, which is data, and get these women's voices in our stories. So I, with a partner, our Singapore bureau chief, decided to tackle this by, first of all, developing a database of women's sources, getting everyone in the newsroom. We started it in Asia, which we're very proud of. It's now gone global for Bloomberg. Usually things were a New York-based organization. Many things start in New York and come to Asia. We did it backwards, or forwards, I think, this time. And started it here, and it's gone global. But we basically went ahead and put together a database. We now have 1,500 women worldwide, about 500 in Asia, of experts in fields, like as detailed as they're a research analyst in this particular kind of commodity, say, or an economist who covers this kind of thing. And then we compelled our reporters to use them as sources, not necessarily on a breaking news story. We're not saying, oh, hold up your story to go quote a woman. That would be silly, right? But what we're telling people to do on feature stories, when they need an analyst, when they need somebody as background for a story, to use this database. And we've had really good success. When we started the project, we were quoting men on average about 16 times more than women, which sounds awful, and it kind of is. But now we are down to quoting men only 6 to 7 times as much as women, which is phenomenal. That's an extraordinary increase. We're also putting a lot more women on television. And I go on TV to talk about US politics and policy in the Asia and early Europe day. And so I try to convince a lot of these women I meet that, hey, if I do this, you can go on TV as well. We give them some coaching. And why is that important? People say, well, having more women on Bloomberg television, that's going to change the world. But it's visibility. That's what this is. If women are not shown on television talking about economics, you don't think women are important economists. You don't see them. You don't hear them. They may exist, but you don't know they exist as consumers. You see women when the PMI numbers come out, the Japan's CPI number comes out, and there's a woman talking about it right away. It's a visible thing, and you start to see it starts to not be unusual to see a Japanese woman economist. So that's what we're trying to do. We're also doing some other things involved in this. I go and speak on a lot of panels, and one of the things we've done at Bloomberg is we've taken a pledge not to be on panels where there are no women. And if men take a pledge, if organizations take a pledge not to have their men go on panels where there's not women, that'll end, because men won't do it. They won't be able to have the panel, period. So we're doing things like that I think are starting to make a difference. It's been not easy. It's not an easy path. People have to think about this differently. A question I get a lot is, well, isn't this just a numbers game? You're just putting, you're talking to women, you're putting them in some stories. How does that really change anything? And again, it's the visibility. It's the fact that we wouldn't be, there are stories that we would not have gotten, stories we would not have broke, scoops we wouldn't have had, because we weren't talking to those people. For instance, we did a story on, this is one of those who knew stories. Women are now controlling the major, they are the chiefs of the major banks in Thailand. We did a story about that went worldwide. We would not have known that story if we weren't talking to those women. So there are things we've broken that, and other things. I don't have nothing's coming to mind right now, but there's other stories that we would not have gotten had we not made that effort to talk to those women.
What was the reaction in the newsroom, like from men and women?
It's been surprisingly good. What we did, we had support from the top from the very beginning. Both the man I mentioned who worked with me at the beginning, who was in charge of news in Asia, and he's since moved back to London, and his replacement, who came from the States, have been very supportive. We've also done something that I would encourage others working on projects like this to do. We've gotten a group of champions, both men and women, from our bureaus across the region. We have, I think, 12 bureaus represented in all different kind of coverage areas, including things like television and the web. And those people are on a bunch of different teams, and they're supportive of the cause, and so they kind of spread the word. And it's become now sort of a badge of honor to be a Women's Voices champion. People want to fill those roles. We've also had support from the very top of our organization. Peter Grauer, who is our CEO, right-hand man to Michael Bloomberg, is chairman of something called, in the States, called the 30% Club, which is, the goal is to get women in 30% of management jobs. And he has been extraordinarily supportive. We did a panel in Singapore last year, my co-lead and I, and he was in Singapore for that, and he led off the panel saying that this is one of the most important things that Bloomberg has done. You would get that kind of support, and people fall into line.
So, Isabel, you have the experience from Portugal. So do you think that in Portugal, Portuguese journalism, women are quoted enough, or think there's a lack of women voices?
Thank you for inviting me to be here. I have to apologize for my English today because I'm very tired and my fluency is not so good. But my experience is that there are women enough in the newsroom, enough it's not a good word, but there are lots of women in the newsroom. But when we start to see in the lead, the top jobs in the newsroom, that's another thing. And I guess here there are two things that we must think about when we talk about this. That's the way that women have her roles in professional sphere and domestic sphere. We we tend to be in the lead. We pretend to dominate all the spheres, and we just can't do it. We are multitasking, but we aren't so multitasking as that. And when we talk about being in a newsroom until 11 p.m. or 12 p.m., the women aren't there because they have to do the domestic stuff. They have to pick the children, and they have to do all that kind of things that most of the people aren't aware of that, but it's the routine, and the routine kills the other things. And when I was crossing the USA with a backpack for 1 year, and the main question that everybody made me was, how do you make your laundry? I don't believe that anybody made that question to a man, if I were a man, but it was the question. So when we deal with these things, these routine things, and we don't think about how we verbalize these thoughts, these preconceived things. I guess that we have to start to question this. This is true to the newsroom, as it's true to the politics, to the parliament, to the economics. I guess it's transversal in the society. It's not a journalistic thing, it's a universal thing.
So, do you think, like, when you're writing your stories, did you ever thought about, should I quote more women or something like this? Like, I'm thinking about this project that Bloomberg has. I really never thought about this. But on the other day, someone was sharing on Facebook, by the way, a database of experts on Asia. So I found it quite interesting. Did you ever think about it, like, should I read more women's books and or interview them more or something?
No, I tried to make my selection by the quality of the quotes. the gender thing, I don't really think about it, but I'm starting to do it because I'm aware of this now. I guess it's important to be aware. In this book, I have only 2 women as writers, but I talked to lots of women, so I don't count it. I didn't count it, but I guess it's. I have a.
It was a special moment because there was a woman that was running for
yes,
president, right?
I was a woman, but if I were me, I don't like to think that I'm in a place because I'm a woman. I like to think that I'm in a place because I have quality to be there. It's a meritocracy. It's not a question of gender, but it is important to think about this question of gender in some ways and in some countries and in some spheres. So it is I have an ambivalence thought about this. I am not sure, but I like to think about that women are there because they deserve to be there. But I guess that until we get to that stage, we have to do a lot. And I guess I'm starting to be more aware of these quotes.
Jenny, what about you? Like when you write your column for Macau Daily Times or your stories, do you think about it? Should I have a certain characters or should I have more women or what do you think?
Well, actually, I have never really thought about this question about man or woman because earlier I was saying that the column I wrote is mainly to try to capture the tradition and customs which has become ritualistic in Macau. People are doing it without knowing the background of it. So I go around, talk to people, and the truth is actually lots of the stories are from older women. Or probably maybe women are more aware or are more interested in passing on stories to their children. So I could say that I don't quote a lot because my column is about tradition, which one thing I have to confess here, it's not, for those who read my column, it's not 100% historical, okay? It's just passed on from generations to generations about stories, but it seems that it's mostly women who are able to tell me the stories about, okay, why we have to pray to the moon during the Mid-Autumn Festival or some traditions that we do in Chinese New Year. It's mostly women who knows that. So what I perceive here is that, and also from the literature that I wrote, that I mentioned, it's not out of choice. I have never thought about this gender issue, but after I was invited to this session, which thank you, Helder, for inviting me here, which gets me to actually think about that my favorite writers, they are mostly women, like Jane Austen, Virginia Woolf, Emily Dickinson, and all those. And what I see is that one difference between women and male writing, I notice, is that male tend to be more realistic. I mean, comparing Dickens and Austen, they are about contemporary writers. From the male point of view, they reveal what is actually happening in the society. It's maybe darker, maybe brighter, depending on reality. But female writers like Austen, they are able to be more romantic. They are more romantic. And I believe that it's more creative, no offense to all the gentlemen here, but women can be more creative because Jane Austen, living in a very suppressed society, facing difficulty, she's able to write novels, which shows romantic and happy lifestyle that we don't see. And I believe in modern writing or journalism, it may be a little bit different between the male and female journalists about what they write, but I think female writing put more emotion about it, and that's also why for my own column, it's usually female who can explain what is the story behind rather than gentlemen who may have heard the story, but they are more from a strict point of view of what they hear, what they see. And the female I interviewed seems to be able to give a bit more explanation of what they think, of what is happening behind.
What about from the newspapers in Macau? Do you think women are quoted enough or not. So Jodi Schneider gave some numbers here. Do you think the same situation happens in Macau?
I don't think so. Actually, from what I see in Macau, I think, I'm not actually a journalist, so correct me for those who are. I think I don't have the statistics, but I think the quote between men and women are quite balanced in Macau. I don't see specific topics where male are quoted more than women, but it depends also on the specialist in the different areas. So for example, in terms of social political issues, men tend to be quoted more, but it also may be because of most of professors in this area are male. And on the other hand, when we look at arts and literature or poetry, we see more women quoted because probably more women are in the area of arts, curating galleries and others. So I think there is a balance in the role. And well, now you raised the question, maybe I'll try to pay a bit more attention and see if we can come up with some statistics for the issue in Macau as well.
That's quite interesting because I guess in the financial industry it's the same, right? I mean, there are many more men that actually take the top positions in the financial industry. So I'm wondering if this campaign, Women Voices, isn't a little bit patronizing towards women. Like, oh, let me give you a hand and let me help you. So it's actually the men who hold the top positions. Shouldn't they be heard more?
Well, first of all, they are being heard, so it's not as though they're losing their voice. I think that's kind of a misnomer. Sometimes people feel that if you quote more women, that you're going to, that men are not going to be quoted anymore, and that's certainly not the case. You're adding voices. I think one of the things we have found, certainly in putting women on television, it really gives people a chance who haven't had a chance. One of the things I hear a lot is when I meet a woman who is, and again, we're talking about newsmakers. We're not talking about, we're just going out and randomly finding women, grocery shopping or something and asking them to be on Bloomberg television. We're talking about people who are economists and who are analysts and who are, in the public sphere, who are experts. They've just not been asked before. And sometimes I will ask a woman I meet at an event, for instance, and get her card and say, oh, you're very accomplished, could we quote you? And often people are fine with that, but then if we say, well, can we put you on television? They say, no, you want to talk to my boss. And we're like, no, we already talked to your boss. We want to talk to you. But if you haven't been on television, that's a little bit more of a leap. So I really don't, I understand the question and I understand the concern. If you were randomly putting people on television or quoting them just to fill a quota, I think that would be problematic and that could be seen as somewhat patronizing, but that's not the intent. The intent is to talk to people, to include people who are experts, who we just haven't heard from because we haven't looked for them. And they do exist. I mean, in a lot of, in Japan where I was, for instance, there are more, the business schools there are graduating as many women as men. They're coming out into the fields. Now, there's whole issues about them rising the fields, and we can talk about some of that. But there are plenty of qualified women in a number of fields. For instance, we have found in China, there are a number of commodity analysts, women commodity analysts, who we just weren't quoting before. Somebody met some of them. There's a group of some commodity analyst group. They went to one of their events. They met all these women. We're quoting them now, and they're giving us great insight. They hadn't been found before.
What do you think about it? Do you think it's patronizing this kind of campaigns, or do you think there should be quotas or something?
I don't know. I don't have statistics, and in my opinion, I always try to think these questions in both sides. I don't like to feel that that is a patronizing. Sometimes I feel that, but I try to combat that with my work and my colleagues. When I see my colleagues doing the same, I'm proud of that. In the newsroom, I never felt any kind of patronization. I felt that thing that I was telling you, that women tend to be multitasking, and that it's not a good thing sometimes. And the responsibility of this is sometimes in this level, we're talking about journalists, we are talking about leading opinion makers and some kind of that. We're not talking about rural ambiences or something like that. Women have responsibilities, and sometimes when they try to control everything, we are freak controllers, we all know that. And it's not good to when the thing is being specialized in something, or try to show that we are capable. And in my work, in my personal experience, I never felt that, never. I don't know if I answered to your question, but that's what I felt.
There has been a big debate, there used to be a big debate in Europe about establishing quotas in different fields. So what's your take on this?
I guess in some places it's important to have that quotes as a kind of position, political position. We have to, if women don't appear, we have to have some paths that they can appear. But in the end, I believe that we, women or men, we don't have never talk about quotes when we talk about statistics, when we talk about men. It's a gender question again, and it's a stigma again. So in the end, I was saying, I believe in meritocracy, and when women have in that sphere of leading positions, women have to show that they are capable to be in the top levels, and not expecting the men to show them the way.
What about you? In Macau, you said that in Macau the situation was quite balanced, but anyway, we have one secretary who's a woman, and we don't have many women lawmakers, for instance. So I don't know if women are that well represented, actually.
Well, that I don't really know. I'm not in all areas. I agree with Isabel. One thing that women are multitask, so I believe there are women in different areas as well. But I still think that maybe on some level, I believe that men and women are equal. But equal and equality are different. I mean, there is one thing, we can believe that men and women are equally capable, but we cannot say that they are equally capable on the same level of everything. So let's say, I know maybe any gentleman here can raise this chair with one arm, and I couldn't do it with both. So there is something different between men and women. But I think the different areas is related to different interests as well. And also, I think the stronger areas in finance, in economics, in politics, men might have a certain advantage in terms of image. Because let's say, if you have a boss who is a male, and he has a temper, throw things and stuff, people were like, wow, he's a tough boss. But if it's a woman, people may think that, oh, she's emotional, it must be her period again, So this is like, okay, sorry for saying that, but there might be not to everyone, but to some people, there might be certain different perception they have between men and women. And that's why there are certain areas where male are more dominating, and there are certain areas where female are dominating. And I guess in terms of writing, no matter for journalism or literary writing or poetry writing, there are certain differences in the style and areas as well.
So that means there are many stereotypes.
I believe so. The same stereotypes that happens everywhere. I won't call it, it might not be a conscious stereotypes that certain people are against women or they are against men. I think it is something that has been rooted for a long time that we don't even realize sometimes.
I was wondering that what kind of stereotypes there are in Macau when people talk about women. I noticed that women always comes next to the word children, for instance, or we talk about women's committee, somehow they end up talking about children. So what kind of stereotypes do you think there are about women in Macau?
Well, I can't answer for everyone from Macau. Maybe we can ask the audience later. But from my own opinion, I guess people have the stereotype that women tend to focus more on the family rather than career. So on some level, I mean, top jobs, I understand why sometimes when a boss have to choose between a man and a woman, it's not because of capability, it's because maybe they believe that women spend more of their time and energy in the family, and men would be focused more on career, which I would say it's not true. I know a lot of friends who are female and very career-oriented, even those who are mothers already, who are still career-oriented. But that could be one of the stereotypes. And another stereotype that I've heard from friends, it's not real research, so there is no basis or statistics, is that female are more emotional. They tend to get emotionally involved, and men are more logical in making decisions. Yes, right. So, which I cannot say if it's true or not, because I have met men who are very emotional also, who gets sad and easily, and who cries easily also. So I think there's equal between men and women, and it's probably, I believe it's more about the culture and upbringing and background rather than just male or female differences in gender.
Jodi, so the campaign Women Voices, it also has anything to do with content, so you also have instructions for Bloomberg journalists to how to refer to women, what kind of language should they avoid or not? Or I am going too far.
I'm sorry.
The campaign Women Voices also includes instructions to journalists about how they should refer to women or not?
No, not really. I mean, what we're trying to do is just include really the same kinds of the ways in which we would quote men and include their takes on our, on analyzing information as it comes out. So we're really not doing anything different except making it clear that we want to hear from more women, and that we also are trying to cover more issues of gender. And this has now become, obviously, with the Me Too movement in the States and the issue of pay inequities and that we're seeing in Europe now, and all the banks and finance companies having to report, this has been a fertile area of exploration for us, and we've been doing more of these kinds of stories.
New stories that have appeared after Me Too, after the Me Too movement.
Yeah, and just about in the issues of pay and gender gaps in various industries in Asia as well as around the world.
I'm asking this because sometimes when I read about career women, whatever this is, sometimes people say, talk about these women and they say, oh, how do you juggle career and family? This is kind of, everyone talks like this about women who have jobs, which is actually a normal thing to have jobs. But it's okay to talk about family, I guess, but they never refer to a man as a family man and a career man at the same time.
Right. Well, one of the things, so I'm going to answer that question in two ways. First of all, in our regular coverage, I often get asked a lot to look at stories where we're talking about women, and I'm happy to do that. And one of the things I always tell people is if you wouldn't say it about a man, you shouldn't say it about a woman if it's a regular news story. For instance, how many times have any of you seen a man's shoes mentioned? maybe if it's a story about Nike or something, but women's kitten heels. If I see one more story where kitten heels are mentioned about a woman, who cares what is on the CEO's feet? I mean, that's patronizing. And we have really tried to get away from that kind of thing. The other thing is, do you mention the fact that she's a mom when you're talking about how her company did last quarter? It probably isn't relevant. If you wouldn't talk about whether he's a dad, you shouldn't talk about whether she's a mom. Now, that's for news stories where we're talking about women who are actors in those stories. If we're writing an enterprise story and it is about her rise, that's a legitimate question, right? Did you face discrimination? If you have children, how did you manage this? It's also a way to tell other people about how she was able to do this and perhaps give them some insight into her world. So that's a little bit different. But in a general news story, we really try to be very, you could ask the question, if you wouldn't say that about a man, should you say it about the woman? And I think most of the time, when you're asking that question, the answer is you shouldn't say it, because you probably wouldn't say it about a man. You certainly wouldn't talk about what he was wearing or how his hair looked or what makeup he wore or didn't wear. He probably wasn't wearing makeup. But for the most part, those questions, and the trivial, this is important because, it might sound silly, but it's important because you're trivializing someone. If this is a CEO of a company or she's a senior manager of a company and we're quoting her in a story, it really does not matter what she's wearing, and it really does not matter how many children she may or may not have. And we are trivializing her by talking about that. And I think it's really important that we not do that we as journalists are serious and that we take these kinds of things seriously. Language matters.
Actually, this sounds a little bit like the 50s, right? How do you take care of their family?
You wouldn't believe how often you see these things. And it's cultural. In Japan, for instance, people talk about housewives. In the States, no one talks about housewives anymore. There really aren't housewives the way we think about it. But in Japan, there still are. And you will see that in stories. You'll see it in headlines. And I always, if I see the story beforehand, I go ahead and say, you can't do that anymore. We're a global news organization. Housewives has become sort of a patronizing, old-form word. And even if there still are some in Japan, we've gone global. We have to go beyond that. So language matters, and you have to think about that. And sometimes you have to have uncomfortable conversations, and people don't always agree, and that's fine, but you have to have the conversations. And that's one of the things I feel is really important. We're having a conversation here now in which we don't agree on a lot of this, but it's important to have these conversations and to do so in a serious way.
Isabel, do you think content is important too? Content is important too?
Content and language. I underline that language is very important. And I would like to make an underline here. We just start to talk about hair since Trump is in presidency. So we have a president that cares a lot about his hair. Maybe we are changing something here, I don't know. But the language is very important, the way we make speech about, when we talk about gender issues, and there is a question here that I would like to mention. It's the sense of guilt that we women sometimes feel when we don't pay the attention that we should think to be paid to the family and to children, and that sense of guilt is very important. We have to think about this, because sometimes, again, we are we have guilt here because we are always thinking about that. I don't want to that you think that I'm not paying enough attention to the feminist questions, and I'm trying to responsibilize women a lot here. But I guess that we as women have to think a lot about this, because sometimes the responsibility is ours, and when we are thinking about family and job and the way we dress, the way we make our hair and makeup and all of that stuff, it's too much. So, and the way the way we talk about things, the way we write about things, why I quote more men or more women. I never thought about it, and it's very important that I'm thinking about probably next week when I interview a man or a woman, I would be more aware of some questions that I have to put. So this conversation is very important. I guess we must talk about all of this.
Because you're a literary critic, I'm wondering that sometimes this question comes up like, oh, you're a writer and talking about women writers, so how could you raise your kids and write at the same time? How did you manage? And this is an issue many women writers are read about it regarding many women writers, but we never read these regarding men writers.
Yes, that's true. 2 weeks ago I interviewed a feminist writer. It was an interview by Skype, and the interview was made with her small kid in her niece. So she was crying, and and she was a feminist. And I told her about this, and she was not felt guilty at all. She told me, I love to be a mom. I don't want to people to look at me as a male writer. I'm a woman. I like to be a woman, but I'm a mother. So at this point, I'm taking care of my child. So here I am with her. So all of this, and for me, it was strange it was very strange. But I made my head, and I thought about it, and it's okay. She's a mother, so what? She's there with her kid. And if we're a man, what was like? I don't know. It never happened.
Talk about this, right?
Yes.
So we have these writers who only started writing after their kids had grown up already, or they left home or something. But we never talk about these things regarding men who actually write.
Yes, and I'd like to say some questions. You were talking about this writing as a man or as a woman. I don't think. Yes, maybe we are more emotional. I don't know. Some of us are, some don't. But I guess we, women or men, we write about our experiences, and if the story of our lives is made of a more domestic world, that professional world, it's natural that we write about that. So maybe we as a woman pay more attention to body languages, or I don't know. But sometimes my colleagues told me, many times they told me that I write like a man. I don't know what is that. I don't know what is write like a man.
Is it?
I guess that I'm emotional enough. I don't want to be more emotional. But these are questions that, so being a woman writer or a man writer, I'm thinking about Virginia Woolf. She writes like a man. She writes like a woman. She writes like Virginia Woolf, and Jane Austen writes like Jane Austen, and there are Paulo Coelho who writes like a man or a woman. I don't know. Maybe we should think a lot about this.
Jenny, what do you think? About women's writing. Actually, there was a writer who came to Rota das Letras, to the Script Road, who talked about this, Rosa Montero, right? I wasn't here, but I read it in the newspaper. Yeah. She said she was quite annoyed when people said that her writing was women's writing. So, what do you think about it?
Really? I don't think, like I mentioned earlier, I think content is important, especially in terms of journalism, where we are reporting things about what we are focusing. I think the writing style is different from everyone, male or female. It is not about being a man or woman anymore. But in terms of journalism writing, news writing, I agree with what Jodi mentioned earlier. It's about what you focus on the writing. Like, you know, when we write, when there are news about the presidents of the States and France and Canada, they compared what their wives are wearing and stuff like that. But with states that have a female prime minister, no one talks about the dressing code of her husband or others. So it is about what we try to focus on that makes a difference. And then in terms of writing style, like Isabel mentioned there, Virginia Woolf can write like a man, and similar to James Joyce. You look at that, you can say that James Joyce write like a woman as well, if you compare that. So I think content is important based on the content itself, and I don't think there is much of a gender issue. It depends on what one's writing is focusing on and the language that one is using. So we try not to objectify any of the gender or male or female, as long as the writing itself is neutral. I don't think it matters whether the writer behind is a male or a female.
Okay, there's also something else regarding the Women's Voices Project. It has to do with barriers women face in journalism. Yeah. But there are so many women that are journalists. So what kind of barriers do they face?
Well, one of the things I think, this is true in Asia, but I think it's also true in the US and Europe, is that women still are relegated to more softer beats. There may be as many women in newsrooms, but when you see the number of women who are covering, for instance, heads of state, and who are covering national security, and who are covering economics, there are not that many women. Those are still regarded as male beats. And women are still clustered as reporters, the administrative jobs, middle managers, but very few are at the top of news organizations. And that plays out in various ways. For instance, one of the ways you get important experience is being allowed to travel, being allowed to take foreign assignments. If you're not, a lot of times male managers, and I've had this conversation with them when we're talking about who's going to get certain assignments, and they'll say, well, she has young kids, she's not going to want to do it. I said, have we asked her? Did anyone ask? Did anyone encourage her? And that doesn't happen a lot. And if you're not encouraged, if you're not asked, if it's decided beforehand you're not going to get those opportunities, those are the opportunities that lead up to other things. And so when it's time to decide who is going to get the top jobs, it's like, well, he's had all these other experiences, he's ready. But did we ever ask if women wanted some of these experiences when it would be time for them to get ready? Because frankly, the time that you're often having your children are those years. Those are the years you need to be doing other things as well. And unless you're able to have those choices, you're not going to be ready when those top jobs are handed out. And that's where when people say, well, there shouldn't be quotas, it would be wrong, it's patronizing, I basically agree with that. But I also agree that then we need to do something to make sure that we have a real pool of women, because there's plenty of women who are qualified. They're just not given the right kind of opportunities. And frankly, they're not pushed. And that becomes an issue sometimes in different cultures. When I was in Japan, I would talk to young women, not just journalists, but for other jobs that we had at Bloomberg, and I'd say, have you raised your hand to let them know that you want to do this? And they'd say, well, I'm not sure I want to. And I would say, okay, well, let's talk about that. What is holding you back? You're qualified, you're capable. Why don't you want these things? No, maybe they don't. Maybe they don't for whatever reasons. But a lot of times they've never been asked. And to me, that's part of the problem. And if we are going to have the best people, if we are not going to lose out on the opportunity to have the best people, we need to make more opportunities. Now, there's the whole question of mentoring and sponsorship, and that's important and complicated. And I fear it's going to get a little bit more complicated in the post-Me Too environment. I think one of the unintended consequences is going to be that a lot of men are going to be reluctant to mentor, particularly younger women. And that's going to be a conversation we're all going to need to start having in newsrooms and other places where we want to widen that pool of women who are ready to take on more senior roles.
So it's getting worse in the US for women after Me Too?
Well, I don't know that things are getting worse. I mean, in some ways things are getting better. We are not allowing bad behavior in workplaces anymore, which is extremely important. You have to feel safe in your workplaces to be able to do your job. But there are unintended consequences, and I think the velocity with which this movement has occurred is making it uncomfortable for some people. And there is a real question about the ways in which we're going to have interaction between genders, particularly older men and younger women, for instance. And what does that mean in terms of something like mentoring? I think in the short run, it means that women are going to have to step up a little bit and push their male colleagues to do mentoring, and are going to perhaps have to do more on their own.
Isabel, so you actually mentioned this in the beginning about journalism, barriers to women journalists. There are many women journalists, but they don't actually hold the top positions. So
I guess that we have talked about it already. There is this thing that I would like to underline here, that to being a woman and have the top position in a corporation or in a newsroom doesn't mean to behave like a man. We are women and we behave like we are. We don't have to copy male behaviors. That's a thing that I would like to underline. If there is any barriers, I don't know. I guess I already answered to that question, but doesn't mean that I have to act like a man.
What about you?
I totally agree to what Isabel said, that because as I already mentioned earlier, different people have different qualities, different ones have different strong points, be it men or women. Some women may have strength which are usually in men, and there are men who have strength that are equally strong in women. So I don't think this is an issue about women having to be like a man in order to be in top position. But again, there is also perception from people who are within the organization or from the general public that might make a difference. But in the end, my point is that I think men and women are still equal, and not equal in the same area, but I believe if we compare positive qualities between men, the positive qualities of men, the positive quality of a woman in terms of taking up a top job, a senior or management job in an organization, they could be measured equally. It depends on what that position requires, so we shouldn't be considering the gender. On the other hand, sometimes it could create a problem because certain organizations might want to seem politically correct, so they want to have an equal number of female or male representatives in certain council or management, and that might be creating problem because they are not looking at people in terms of the qualities that are needed. They are too much hooked on this having the equal number of men and women. But if they actually look at qualities, who can say maybe there could be more women in the area than men, or maybe there could be more men. It depends on the background and quality, and perception also, what one perceives would be expected from others.
Okay, now, does anyone have any question? We also would like to hear from men, of course. No one? Okay, I don't know, just to wrap up, since we have two people here who have been in the United States and who have been actually following the elections very closely. So what do you think these elections had, and also they had on women perceptions around the world? I mean, the elections in the United States, Hillary Clinton, etc. What do you think the elections, what was the impact of the election, presidential election in the US regarding women issues?
Oh, okay. Well, that's a big question. I could answer it a number of ways. But one thing I will say is that I do think, you know, a whole lot has been analyzed, obviously, about the 2016 election. I helped cover it in the States. I went back from Japan to help cover it. And I think one of the lasting things, and it's not necessarily positive, is that people view Hillary Clinton's defeat as partly that she was a woman women who supported her viewed it as she lost partly because people were not comfortable with a woman candidate, and there was some misogyny. And I think both of those things are probably true, but she lost for other reasons too. And people who didn't support her are on the other side saying, well, that just goes to show you. There were a lot of reasons she lost, but in the end, it came down to 78,000 votes in 3 states because of the Electoral College. It was not a landslide. It was not a wave victory. It was an extraordinarily close result in an extraordinarily divided country. It probably had some to do with her being a woman. And there was certainly some sexism. There were some things she couldn't raise her voice on the campaign trail the same way a man could, for instance. It's very difficult to campaign as a woman, particularly on a national stage. But there were a lot of other things going on in that election. And one of the things I think perhaps will happen, I hope it doesn't, but I think it may be a while before we have a serious woman candidate for president again, because it's become such a loaded topic.
So, in your travels in the US for the book, I guess Hillary Clinton being a woman was a big issue.
I guess Jen answered to that, and there is another question here that the word harassment started to be listened with the campaign when Trump was a candidate. So we are in a growing process here. We passed it wasn't. It doesn't. He won the election besides that accusation of harassment, but now that question passes him, and we are talking in a way more mature about that issue. And I don't know. It's very soon to answer to that question. The movement Me Too. We are in the middle of that process. There is lots of hysteric positions. But we have to wait. But this is a time very strange, but also very interesting. And we as women must be very present to discuss this item.
Since you are between the States and Portugal, do you see any Me Too impact in Portugal so far? What's the impact of Me Too in Portugal, if there is any?
It's the same, I guess. We listen to the news. We read the social media and the newspapers, and I guess we are in this hysterical moment. Everybody's yelling. The positions are very extremated, and we have to wait a little bit to understand more about this.
Jenny, do you think Macau is going to have a Me Too moment?
About the same question?
Yes. Well, do you think Macau is going to have a Me Too moment, or did it ever happen in Macau, something close to Me Too, where people were talking about women issues?
In Macau, I don't see a lot of public debates about women issue, and there are not many female candidates also in all terms of election. Coming about head of state, well, not states, but chief executive, we never see a woman candidate. And even with the General Assembly, the number of women candidates are not high. So I think on some level, maybe we are in a more reserved place. I think people in Macau are more not too much into politics. So this issue in the States, it raised some issue because I remembered a group of my friends, we were all betting that it would be Hillary Clinton winning the vote. That's no way that Trump is going to win. But in the end, it came out of a surprise. And I think there are people who believe that might be an issue that because she's a woman, otherwise she would have won. So, but I don't think it affects a lot. In fact, I think after that, in this year's election, there has been more female candidates and more female get into the Legislative Assembly, if I didn't get the news wrong. So I don't think it brings a lot of a Me Too issue here. And on some level, it might have motivated more people, more female to stand up and do more. I'm looking forward to a female chief executive one day, but we'll have to see to that.
Okay, does anyone have any question? Yeah. Inês?
Hi. So I would like to ask, you have different experiences, I'm sure, because you come from different countries. But as many journalists are women, and particularly young women, and many of the interviewees are men, and many times men of power, men in high positions, if you ever feel that women, these young women, are not taken seriously when they are interviewing them, so sometimes they are patronizing, or sometimes it's better to ask a male colleague to do the interview or to ask the question because there is this disregard. Subtle, I imagine, but if you think that this happens. Thank you.
I'll take a stab at that. We discussed this at Bloomberg because we have, a lot of young women journalists who we want to, rise and train, and it's actually can be, particularly in finance and things, it can be actually sometimes an issue of safety. Should they go for drinks with somebody and that kind of thing. But what we find is important is that we not say, hey, we're not going to let women cover certain things because it's going to make some people uncomfortable. If they're capable of doing it, they should do it. Now, sometimes we will send them, there's situations where you would want to send them maybe with somebody older that wouldn't necessarily have to be a man, but just, that if we worry that they're not going to be taken seriously, but that part of this is them showing they are capable and them being prepared. And, a lot of that goes away after a while. They show up, they ask good questions, this person starts to trust them. They forget that, they were a young journalist and their initial impression was that they weren't all that seasoned. So I think we have to work against stereotypes and not help perpetuate them.
Any other questions? Doesn't seem so. Okay, thank you so much for coming, and it's a lot of things you can think about in the future, and thank you for coming. Thank you.